Welcome to Storytime, where chilling tales come to life. In today's story, we're diving into the eerie and unsettling world of a mansion where shadows whisper and the past refuses to stay buried. Prepare yourself for a suspenseful journey into the unknown with our latest tale, The Silent Shadows. As you listen, keep your lights on and your doors locked. This story is not for the faint of heart. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe for more haunting tales, and if you enjoy the story, give it a thumbs up. Now, let's begin. The night Laura first heard the whisper was just the beginning. When Laura first arrived at the mansion, the sun was still high in the sky, casting a warm, golden light across the property. The mansion stood proudly atop a hill, its tall spires reaching toward the heavens, framed by the dense woods that surrounded it. She felt a sense of awe mixed with apprehension as she gazed up at the structure, marveling at its beauty while feeling an inexplicable chill in the air. The move had been exhausting, but Laura was eager to settle in. She spent the day unpacking her belongings, filling the rooms with her personal touches. The mansion, though dusty and unused for years, had a certain charm to it. She couldn't wait to explore every nook and cranny. As the day wore on, she noticed something odd. No matter how much sunlight streamed through the large windows, the mansion seemed to hold on to shadows. Corners remained dark, and rooms felt dimmer than they should. It was as if the light was being absorbed by the house, leaving an ever-present gloom. By evening, Laura was too tired to give it much thought. She retired early, falling into a deep sleep, unaware of the whispers that would soon invade her nights. The following morning, Laura woke refreshed, the events of the previous day already fading from her memory. She decided to spend the day exploring the grounds. The mansion was surrounded by acres of land, including an old garden that had long been overtaken by wild growth, and a small pond that reflected the sky like a mirror. As she wandered through the garden, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Several times, she turned around, expecting to see someone behind her, but the garden was empty. She laughed at herself, brushing off the sensation as nerves. Returning to the mansion in the afternoon, she stood at a distance, taking in the full view of the house. That's when she saw it, a shadow moving across one of the upper windows. Her heart skipped a beat, and she blinked, thinking it must be a trick of the light. But the shadow didn't disappear. It lingered for a moment before slipping out of sight. Laura hurried inside, rushing up the stairs to the room where she had seen the shadow. The door was closed, just as she had left it that morning. When she opened it, the room was empty, just as it had been before. She tried to shake off the unease, telling herself that old houses creaked and groaned, and the mind played tricks in unfamiliar places. But deep down, a sense of dread began to take root. That night, the whispers began. Faint at first, they seemed to come from the walls themselves. Laura lay in bed, her heart pounding as she strained to hear the words. They were too muffled to make out, but the tone was unmistakable, urgent, pleading, and filled with sorrow. She got up and walked through the house, following the whispers. They grew louder as she approached the library, the same room where she had seen the shadow earlier that day. As she stepped inside, the air grew colder, and the whispers stopped abruptly. The room was silent, but Laura felt an overwhelming sense of unease, as if something was waiting, just out of sight. She backed out of the room, closing the door behind her. The whispers didn't return that night, but Laura slept fitfully, waking often with a sense of being watched. The next day, Laura couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She tried to go about her routine, but the mansion felt different, more oppressive. The light streaming through the windows seemed dimmer, and the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to grow darker and longer. While outside, tending to the garden, Laura glanced back at the mansion and froze. There, in the same upper window, was the shadow again. This time, it was unmistakable, a tall, dark figure standing just inside the glass. Laura's breath caught in her throat, and she felt a cold sweat break out across her skin. She dropped her tools and ran inside, determined to confront whatever was in the house. But when she reached the room, it was empty once again. The shadow was gone, leaving nothing behind but an eerie silence. Laura began to doubt her own senses. Was she imagining things? Was the stress of the move and the isolation of the mansion playing tricks on her mind? She tried to convince herself that it was nothing, but the gnawing fear wouldn't go away. That night, The mansion came alive with noise. Laura was jolted awake by the sound of footsteps echoing through the halls. They were heavy, deliberate, as if someone, or something, was walking through the house. She lay still, her heart pounding in her chest, listening as the footsteps grew closer. They stopped just outside her bedroom door. Laura's breath hitched, and she pulled the covers up to her chin, praying that whatever was out there would go away. But instead, the door creaked open slowly. She couldn't see anything in the darkness, but she felt, that something was in the room with her. A shadow moved across the floor, gliding toward her bed. It was formless, shifting, more like a mass of darkness than a solid figure. Laura wanted to scream, but the sound caught in her throat, paralyzed by fear. The shadow hovered at the foot of her bed, watching her. Laura squeezed her eyes shut, willing it to disappear. When she finally opened them, the shadow was gone, but the room was still freezing, and she could feel its presence lingering. Laura didn't sleep for the rest of the night, determined to understand what was happening. Laura spent the next day researching the history of the mansion. She visited the local library and spoke to the town's historian, hoping to find some answers. What she learned sent chills down her spine. The mansion had been built over a century ago by a wealthy landowner who was obsessed with the occult. He had conducted strange rituals in the house, trying to contact spirits and unlock the secrets of the afterlife. But something had gone wrong. According to the stories, the landowner had disappeared one night, never to be seen again. The mansion had been abandoned shortly after, left to decay as the years passed. Locals spoke of the house with fear, claiming it was cursed. There were stories of people who had gone missing after entering the mansion, and of strange lights and sounds coming from the property at night. Laura returned to the mansion with a heavy heart, knowing now that whatever was haunting the house was no mere ghost. It was something darker, something that had been awakened by her presence. That night, Laura was prepared. She armed herself with anything she could find: candles, salt, an old crucifix she had found in one of the rooms, hoping to protect herself from whatever was in the house. As the sun set and darkness fell over the mansion, the atmosphere grew thick with tension. Laura could feel the presence growing stronger, the shadows creeping closer, as if they were alive. The whispers began again, louder and more insistent than before. They were no longer just whispers. They were screams, cries of anguish that echoed through the halls. The walls seemed to close in around her, the temperature dropping rapidly until her breath came out in visible puffs. And then, the shadow appeared. It was no longer a vague figure in the distance. It was right in front of her, a mass of darkness that seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. Its eyes, glowing red embers, bored into her, filled with anger and hatred. Laura screamed and threw the crucifix at the shadow. For a moment, it seemed to hesitate, the darkness flickering as if uncertain. But then it surged forward, engulfing her in a wave of cold. She felt the air leave her lungs, her vision darkening as the shadows surrounded her. The last thing she heard was the sound of the whispers, now clear and distinct, repeating the same words over and over. "Leave this place." Laura was found the next morning by a passing hiker, unconscious on the front lawn of the mansion. She was rushed to the hospital, where she spent several days recovering. When she finally awoke, she had no memory of how she had ended up outside. The mansion was empty when the authorities arrived, but they noted that the inside had been disturbed, as if someone, or something, had been living there. Laura never returned to the mansion. She sold the property, leaving the countryside for good. But the experience stayed with her, haunting her dreams and filling her with a sense of dread that she could never shake. She knew the mansion was still out there, waiting. And she knew that one day, it would call her back. Thank you for joining us on this chilling journey through the silent shadows. We hope this tale kept you on the edge of your seat and left you with goosebumps. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to hit that like button and share it with others who love a good scare. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Storytime for more spine-tingling tales that will keep you up at night. Have a scary story of your own? Drop it in the comments. We'd love to hear it. Until next time, stay safe, keep the lights on, and remember, some shadows are best left in the dark.